I'm Dana Lloyd, Chevy Lloyd's father, just making a video. It's my son, he just turned 14. Trying to make a quick video to better explain a little bit about what we've been through. I'd raised my son since birth. His birth mother I had met in San Diego. She had had children previously. She had 2 boys. She wasn't with them when we met. When she became pregnant, we were together but separated. I had raised him on my own since he was 3 days old, sole custodial father. Did let him get to know his biological grandmother, Susanna Ariano. My son was born baby boy Ariano. His name's Chevy Lloyd. I named him. And when he was about 7 years old, I met my wife. We had moved into a new apartment complex. And my wife and her family were our neighbors. She lived with her mother, her brother, and her son Daniel, who became my stepson. My son's biological grandmother, Susanna Ariano, didn't like my wife and works in the counseling industry. She does the DEJ program and parenting classes in El Monte in East Los Angeles. I had tried to be close with her for my son's sake. Originally thought that maybe it was a good thing that he know her or have family here in contact with. Susanna was never in contact with Antoinette, his birth mother. I hadn't been in contact with her since shortly after he was born. And Susanna had me, I first started to volunteer for her to help answer phones at her program, but then she started having me take on a larger role, starting to help with teaching classes and things like that. I didn't like how she treated some of the clients, and for me, just didn't want to work there, be that closely associated with her. My son had been injured when he went to visit her. She dropped him off without any explanation when he was little, and then gave a couple different stories that didn't really make sense to me. At the time, I thought it was probably like an oversight. Maybe she wasn't paying attention or supervising properly, and thought maybe he just got injured through an oversight and that she was making up stories to, I guess, try to, I don't know, explain instead of just telling the truth. Tried to cut down my time, or my son's time, I should say, with her, limit their contact and things like that, and make it so like we'll all be together if they got together. And she made it very difficult to separate, I guess, that like one-on-one contact where she would only want to take my son by himself. When I got married, she wouldn't include my stepson in things. My wife and I had helped with Zachary. My son had a little half brother that Antoinette had after my son was born. And Chevy and Zachary were close, but Susanna, when she didn't need babysitting anymore, like cut the kids off. We really didn't want my son alone with her because she was a bad influence or not suitable. And she refused to get together in public places, like for the sake of the kids. My wife passed away August of 2020. She called me that she was having trouble breathing. She's asthmatic. When I went down to help her, I asked if she wanted to go to a hospital. She had said no. I thought she would be okay. When I did call 911, they responded. I believe it was just the fire department, and they were telling me that she had a signal to her heart. I was asking that they defibrillate her, but they didn't. And they were trying to like calm me and like separate me while they worked on her. Then her mother and brother came down. They told me that my wife wasn't going to make it, and I asked about her phone. They were supposedly going to give it to me, but ended up giving it to my mother-in-law instead. And they were asking about who to call for, to whether it was going to be the morgue or the coroner, and I just had no idea about any of that, of course, just being in shock and totally unprepared for that kind of situation, not expecting it. And shortly after my wife's death, I became aware that they were trying to use her accounts, using her OfferUp account, trying to access her bank account. I later found out that they started putting up GoFundMes like 24 hours or less after my wife passed away. Her family seemed to only be concerned about money and was pushing for like the quickest, fastest option, where I wanted to have a funeral. Ended up going with cremation at Rose Hills, where she was brought to after she passed. My mother-in-law was trying to hurry things along and pushing for cheaper options, and my intention was to take care of expenses and then anything else to try to split between the families, where my stepson had been living back with his grandmother and uncle. Shortly after she passed, I became aware that I believe the upstairs neighbors in 410 were like stalking me, possibly surveilling me illegally somehow. My mother-in-law tried to extort me for my wife's phone, and they had given the phone to my brother-in-law, my mother-in-law, I guess my brother-in-law's friend. And more recently, I had become aware that we were being stalked. Things left everywhere we went when it was just my son and I. They were leaving like piles of things everywhere. We'd had burglaries where things were stolen and left in the apartment, were poisoned through the air. I believe it was poisoned. I was drugged. I called 911 to report being drugged and poisoned. I went to the police station. They locked the door during business hours. Another time made fun of us when we went about being poisoned and asked if we wanted more cancer. We were left without keys and notified the management company that we were being poisoned. My son made allegations about school administration, that the principal had a big dick and kids were carrying knives to school. At first he said it was just an expression, but with everything that's happened since, I became more concerned that there's child abuse involved with the school. The grandmother working with children's services and teaching the DEJ, working with the police, law enforcement and such through the DEJ programs and parenting classes. There had been suspicious deaths in his family, where his aunt and uncle both passed away about a year apart at a young age, I was told, from cancer. And his half brother, I was told, Matthew Ariano, passed away, the grandmother said, from an energy drink. When we were being poisoned, we had gone to visit and hadn't spoken to them for a couple years before that, had, stayed separate from them for trying to keep my son safe in a better environment, better influence. But we did go to visit them on Halloween. The grandmother told me that Matthew had died from energy drinks. I was concerned if maybe it was murder or something else, if maybe she's killing family members for life insurance policies or something like that. I had had my lease documents falsified, brought them to the police station. I went to the management company to make sure that my son and I were the only ones on the lease and that we weren't responsible for any other leases if there was identity theft involved or anything like that. They falsified a lease. They haven't been the management company the entire time, but were trying to give me a post-dated move-in date